Good evening. How's everybody doing? It's great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon, 16th of June, Father's Day. I'd like to wish my father and all my fellow fathers a joy-filled, healthy, and meaningful Happy Father's Day. And I'd actually like to share with you a lesson that I learned today on Father's Day, a Torah lesson from an unexpected place. But first, let me welcome a few folks. Yehud in South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Bill in Missouri, Sharon in New Jersey, Clay in South Carolina. Welcome, Clay. I don't think I've seen your name recently. Guy in Ohio, Paula in the Great Northwest, John in Maine. Paula, thank you, Paula. It is my birthday today, my American birthday, my secular year calendar birthday, June 16th. I appreciate that. Bella in Florida, Bella's in Texas, Melissa in Great Neck, Debbie in New Jersey. Where'd it go? Yes, and Joe in the Inland Empire. Also Ilanit in Silver Spring. Welcome, everybody. It is my birthday, and quite often, it seems, my birthday lands on Father's Day. I share a birthday with the great golfer Phil Mickelson, and the U.S. Open, the toughest test of golf in the world. It's one of the four majors, and they always set up the course to be, literally, the hardest course in the world, and so it often ends on this day. And today, in case somebody taped it, I won't give it away, but it was a spectacular championship that really came down to the wire. Thrilling finish. And what it came down to, and here's the Torah of golf, okay? This is an absolute Torah lesson, and it's very much a Talmudic lesson, so everybody here who's in our class will understand how this is a kal v'chomer inference, as I will explain. So the championship today came down to who handled tough lies and bad mistakes better. Okay, now I think we can all understand that metaphor easily. Life is so often a bad lie, meaning that you end up in a situation where it's really tough to get out of it, to advance. You don't have good choices. Every choice is difficult. Some are more risky. Some are going to, be less productive. But there's no clear path that's just a slam dunk. We got to really do our best. And very often when we take a shot out of those difficult situations, we make a mistake. And sometimes we make a big mistake. And having made a mistake, then what's our next move? Because it's so human. When you're in a tough spot and you make a mistake, you get so discouraged. You can only think about the bad mistake you made. It looks like you're going to be, because you went from bad to worse, right out of the frying pan into the fire, from one tough lie to a tougher lie. Now, you made a mistake out of the tough lie. How are you going to not make a mistake out of an even tougher lie or the toughest lie? And we start to spiral, and it gets so difficult, right? Now, these guys, professional golfers, 100% I can guarantee you, they have probably a team of psychologists and coaches and therapists and people who are helping them work on their mental game, their emotional game, their psychological game, their ability to recover from tough lies and big mistakes, to not let it get to them, to stay positive, to look at all the times I've succeeded in similar situations in the past with God's help. With God's help, I can do it again. Just focusing on the positive and getting back on track. That doesn't come naturally to them. Every guy who wins such a championship has trained himself to make a substantial change in their personality, in their emotional constitution, so that they can handle bad lies and big mistakes better. They go through it over and over again. They rehearse it. They review the times that they've made the mistakes and didn't recover and think about what went wrong and how can I do it next time. And they're doing all of that so that they can make a lot of money and be respected and win tournaments and be successful in their golf career during their lifetime. And all of us are mortals who have a finite lifetime. How much more do we have to take seriously and train ourselves to recover from tough lies and big mistakes when the stakes that we're playing for isn't big money and prestige and winning tournaments and getting commercials and getting really rich, but rather obtaining the best possible portion in the world to come, which is eternal, right? To get a position from this lifetime to sort of get set up as your starting place, to get your neighborhood, as it were, to get your level of the infinite number of levels in the eternal world to come, right? It's not for a few years. It's not for a few decades. It's forever. And we get such a better portion, a chelik, such a better portion in the world to come if we keep passing and training ourselves to pass those tests in this world. When we were in a tough spot, and instead of reacting harshly and being unkind to somebody that's around us, instead of multiplying errors by not growing in wisdom every time we go through it, instead of training ourselves by studying our emotional makeup and learning from our masters and our sages and people who can inspire us so that we can make emotional, personality, intellectual, psychological changes, making a repair in ourselves. We're all playing on a much bigger stage than the US Open championship or the Olympics or any championship, right? But the beautiful thing is we can be inspired by these athletes, top-level athletes, who make those internal changes in order to win because we see them do it, we learn it's possible. We can do it. A human can do this. Of course we can do this. The whole point of our whole tradition, right? What do? What did God send us into this world to do, right? To fulfill our mission. And fulfilling our mission is for sure, we're not going to fulfill it to the utmost if we don't make repairs in ourselves, because we will never bring our instrument up to its full potential to do good in this world, to be creative in this world, to give the world the gift that only each of us can give if we don't make that repair in ourselves. And we see from those athletes that it's possible, and we see that they do it, and how much more is it possible, and should we do it, and can we do it, and let's do it, because God gave us this opportunity and the tools to rise to the occasion. So may we all be inspired by these winners, and Kal Vachomer take that inspiration in our own lives next level. Okay. That's what I wanted to share with you, and that's my blessing to you on my birthday, that you should study yourself and understand how you react when you get in tough lives, what mistakes you've made, and learn from them, and do better the next time around. Okay, our daf today is page 106 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through Chapter 9, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 6. And the concept here is exactly, wow, could it be more apt, what we are talking about. The Mishnah said that one who receives a field from another to cultivate, right? So he is a tenant farmer. He's renting this farm. So he's not a rich guy. He's already in a tougher spot than a landowner. He's renting land. And he has chosen to make the deal that I owe you an absolute amount of rent to be paid as produce from this land. And beyond that, whatever I can farm, I'm going to keep. So if I happen to have a tough year, if they expect all the rain that came last year doesn't come this year, or if there's a wind blast, or there's, or if grasshoppers, a blight, a plague of grasshoppers come and attacks the crop and kills it. Terrible, terrible lie, terrible spot to be in. Then what am I going to do? How am I going to handle myself with righteousness and do the best that I can in that tough spot? Okay, so that's what the Mishnah is about. Bottom line, if everyone, right, they say around the world, but they really mean if everyone in your region, right, all of the surrounding farms got affected the same way, okay, then this is really bad luck on the whole community, and you can reduce the amount of rent that you owe because everyone is going to be so hard pressed to be productive. But the rules are tough here, right? But if it only happens to your field, the field that you've rented, wasn't your fault, but the grasshoppers came and they only attacked your field, bad luck. That was a risk you undertook when you entered into this tenancy relationship as a tenant farmer, and you still have to pay the rent. It's really bad luck, terrible luck, but that's the jam you're in. So if everybody got shafted like that, then you can reduce the rent. But if it's only you, you still have to pay the rent. That's the general rule from the Mishna. We picked this up a few paragraphs from the top on page 106a, and now the Gemara presents a question. If all the fields of the owner of the land were windblasted, right? So this weather phenomena that came and killed all the crops. So all the fields of the owner, so the landowner rented one of his fields to the tenant farmer, but he has other fields that either he's farming himself or he's renting out to other tenants. Nina opened the door. I didn't need to hear the word. I forgot to light the wisdom candle. Okay, right? So now we're talking about that the owner has a bunch of fields. He rented one to the tenant, and he has others that either he's farming or he rented to other people. So if all the fields of the owner of the land got blasted by the wind, and this one that the tenant rented was blasted along with them, but the majority of the surrounding valley was not wind blasted. So it seems like the bad luck came to the fields owned by the owner, but not to other neighbors. And the tenant's field was part of the owner's multiple fields that got wind blasted. So then what is the law? Do we say that since the majority of the valley was not wind blasted, the tenant farmer does not subtract from the rent that he owes to the owner? Or perhaps one could claim that since all the lands of the owner were wind blasted, so the tenant can say to the owner, well, this happened due to your bad fortune, as it's all of your fields that got blasted. If we look around, it's not like all the neighborhood, not like all the valley, not like everybody else got this. It's all your fields. I just got caught up in your bad luck. Why should I be the one who suffers? I need to be able to reduce the rent. And the Gemara responds, it stands to reason that the owner could say in answer to the tenant, if it was due to my bad fortune, a little would have been left for me. As it is written, for we are left but a few from many. That's a line in Jeremiah. And the sages interpret from that, learn out from that verse, that this indicates that even one suffering from misfortune does not lose all he has. So very interesting. If you lose everything, it's not because you did something wrong. It's because you got caught up in just a general misfortune of other people. Even if it seems pretty specific to you, if you lost everything, you got caught up in some kind of bigger thing. But if you lose almost everything, then according to this, that's a message, right? That you had that misfortune for a reason. So according to this view. Gemara discusses a similar case. If all the fields of the tenant farmer were wind blasted, and most of the valley was wind blasted, and this field was also wind blasted with them, then what is the law? Do we say that since most of the valley was wind blasted, the tenant farmer subtracts from the rent that he owes to the owner? Or perhaps since all the tenant's lands, right? It seems like he was singled out, not the owner's fields, but everything that the tenant rented, those are the fields that got wind blasted. So the owner can say to the tenant, the damage is due to your bad fortune, as all your fields were wind blasted. Now we would expect, well, if all of mine were wind blasted, then it's not my misfortune. It would only be my misfortune if almost everything of mine got wind blasted, according to the argument that was just made before. And the Gemara responds, it stands to reason that the owner can say to him, it occurred due to your bad fortune. But I just gave the answer, right? But isn't this the same argument that the tenant could now make? And the Gemara asks, why should this be so? Here too, let us say to the owner, if it was due to my bad fortune, a little would have been left for me, right? As you just argued, in this hypothetical, if the owner could make that argument, obviously the tenant could make the same argument, right? The following verse would have been fulfilled for me, for we are left but a few from many. And the Gemara answers, this doesn't work in this case, because the owner could say to the tenant, had you been worthy of something being left for you, it would have been left for you from your own private land, not the field that you paid to cultivate. I mean, it seems like, if I understand that correctly, he's saying you're already down on your luck, and now you've lost everything. If you had something to save, it would be that you had some of your own land to save, but you've already lost that. I'm not sure why these arguments are not parallel. Maybe you can help. I'm going to go on, because the Gemara goes on. The Gemara raises an objection from a Mishna to the ruling that if there is a regional disaster, the cultivator subtracts from the produce he owes as part of his tenancy. So the law is that if one sells his field in the land of Israel in a time when the laws of the Jubilee year are in effect, he does not have the right to purchase it from the buyer until 2 years have passed. And the Mishnah teaches in Tractate Arachin 29b that if it was a year of windblasted crops or mildew, or it was the Sabbatical year, or if those years were like the years of Elijah, in which no rain fell, where there was a terrible famine, you can see that in 1 Kings 17, then they do not count as part of his tally of years before he may repurchase his land. It's like these bad crop years for everybody, these years of famine, sort of don't count in the legal tally of crop years because everybody, had the misfortune. Everybody had that misfortune. So since we brought up the case of the tenant farmer and all the fields in the surrounding valley were also windblasted, so why do we even need the complex argument that he needs to make? Well, if it was my misfortune, I wouldn't have lost everything. I would have saved a little. Let's just stick with the Mishnah. If his fields are all windblasted within a valley, the whole valley was windblasted, then that's what the Mishnah said. He can deduct, right? That's what the Gemara is saying. We don't have to handle that argument of why is one argument different. The difference is that the Mishnah already said that the tenant doesn't have to pay if the surrounding fields, in a wide enough area were windblasted, then he's included in that. So the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah. This Tana teaches, right? And now we're learning out from when you're doing purchase and sale of land. Remember that you never sell land in right, ancient Israel, tribal Israel. You're only selling crop years until the next Jubilee year. That would come every 50 years. And then the land would return to its ancestral owner. So if you're selling crop years, we're learning that these years of famine don't count toward crop years. And we're using that as a proof to bring us back to our own Mishnah here. If the surrounding valley is bad, well, then that's like crop years that don't count. Is that what's being said? Let's see. So the Tana teaches that the cases of windblasts and mildew are similar to the case where the years were like the years of Elijah. So just as the years of Elijah is referring to a time when there was no produce at all because of the steep famine in the land, so too, here, windblasts and mildew are referring to cases when there was no produce at all. But by inference, one can learn that if there was some produce, it does count toward his tally of years before he may repurchase his land. And we do not say that it is a regional disaster. So the Gemara answers, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, there the case with regard to the sold field is different. As the verse states, with regard to the sale and leasing of fields, according to the number of crop years, he shall sell to you, Leviticus 25:15. And this is referring to years in which there is produce harvested in the world, not regional famine. Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, if that is so, the sabbatical year should count for him as part of his tally of years. At least there is produce outside of Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kahana said to him, the sabbatical year is an abrogation of the king. Meaning, God said, don't plant. That's obviously going to be a different category than if there was no planting because there was famine. Therefore, it should not be included in the number of the years before land is repurchased. So Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Mari, said to Ramina, if that is so, that the sabbatical year is entirely disregarded, then in the case of one who consecrates his field and wants to redeem it, a sabbatical year should not count for him for the deduction of the price of the field when it is redeemed, right? When you sell it, when you donate your land, the value of your land to the Holy Temple, when the temple is standing, and what are you doing? You're donating it for the number of years until it will come back. So you have to add up what is the value of those crop years, because that is what you are going to need to pay in order to redeem your field so that you get it back from its consecrated status when you cannot use it. Right? So the sabbatical year, if we're saying that the sabbatical year, when we're not allowed to plant every 7 years, we're not allowed to plant the land when the sabbatical year is in effect, like when the Holy Temple is standing, basically, though some people observe Shemitah even now, but really when it's in effect, throughout Israel is when the temple is standing. So then the sabbatical year should not count for him for the deduction of the price of the field when it is redeemed. So why do we learn in a Mishnah that the one who consecrated his field gives a sela and a pundeyon coin, which is worth 16 perutot, to the temple treasury for each year remaining until the Jubilee year? And this includes sabbatical years, in accordance with the payment prescribed by the Torah in Leviticus 27:16. So the amount to be paid per year, which is 50 shekels, divided by the years remaining until the Jubilee year, should not take the upcoming sabbatical years into account if you're saying that sabbatical years don't count because they're not crop years. But we do take them into the account when we're deconsecrating the land. So Ravina said to him, there it is different as it is suitable for laying out produce on it. Although one may not plant the field during the sabbatical year, one may use it for other purposes because it's his land. So even if he's consecrated it, then he cannot use it even for that purpose. And so that's why he has to deconsecrate and pay for all those years. So Shmuel said they taught the halacha that if there is a regional disaster, the cultivator subtracts from the produce he owes as part of his tenancy only if the tenant planted the field and it sprouted and then grasshoppers consumed it, or he planted it with a different seed, but if he did not plant it at all, then the tenant is not entitled to subtract from the amount that he owes, even if there was a regional disaster, right? So now we're changing the case. Not whether the tenant can argue that he should get a reduction in the rent because it was a regional disaster and he was included in it or not. Now we're looking at a different aspect of that, where you're only going to get the benefit of that protection if you as the tenant farmer did your job, right? You contracted, you rented the field with the agreement of the owner because you promised that you would plant the field, right? So if you didn't actually plant the field, if you abandoned the field, if you walked away from it, and then there was a regional disaster, and you can say, I don't have to pay you because there was a regional disaster. We say to you, you didn't even try, so tough turkey on you, you owe the rent, right? You're not going to get the benefit of that protection. This is because the owner can say to him, had you planted the field, perhaps my merit would have prevented the field from being affected by the epidemic, and the following verse would have been fulfilled for me. They will not be shamed in the time of evil, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied, right? So on the one hand, when we enter tough times and everybody's having a tough time, you want to be wise and not just do what everybody's doing that they have been doing over and over again, and it's produced a bad result. So maybe that's a time to be creative and try something different. But if so, don't enter into that tenant-farmer relationship. But maybe that's not an option at all. Maybe you had to enter and you were just praying that things would go well. Okay, then you do your hishtadlus, right? You do your part. You do the best that you can, and then you cry out to God for help that things should improve, because the gate of tears, the gate of crying out to God is always open no matter what's going on in the world. So they shall not be shamed in the time of evil. In the days of famine, they shall be satisfied. Who is they? They who look, to God for salvation and for help, but who also do their hishtadlus, right? You have to do your part. You have to do your work. Just don't put all your stock in the work that you do. Don't despair if you do all the hard work and it still goes bad. We do our part. We cry out to God to help, and then we accept the result. That is growth, when we can do that. Rav Sheshes raises an objection from Baraisa in the case of a shepherd who was herding the animals of others, and he left his flock and he came to the town, and in the meantime a wolf came and tore an animal to pieces, or a lion came and trampled one of the flock. We do not say definitively that had he been there, he would have rescued them and therefore he is liable due to his absence. Rather, the court estimates with regard to him, if he could have rescued his animal by chasing a beast of this kind away, he is liable, as his departure from the scene was certainly a contributing factor to the damage. If not, he's exempt from liability. So according to Shmuel's opinion, why is the shepherd exempt from liability? Let the owner say to him, had you been there, the following verse would have been fulfilled for me. Your servant smote both the lion and the bear. Right? I mean, the guy who didn't even bother planting, and we say to him, well, listen, everybody had a famine, but you should have planted because you agreed to plant, and maybe it would have gone better. Right? So if we hold that way, why do we say to the shepherd that, he went to the bathroom or he went to town and slept when he maybe should have been with the sheep, and then a lion came, but it was a lion. Right? So even if he was there, he wouldn't have been able to stop a lion. But why don't we say the same thing to him that we say to the tenant farmer? Well, had you been there, maybe the merit would have saved you. Maybe the merit of the owner of the sheep or your own merit might have saved you. But since you weren't there, you can't make that claim. Why don't we treat the shepherd and the farmer the same? So the Gemara answers, this is because the shepherd could say to the owner, if you are worthy of a miracle occurring to you, a miracle would have indeed occurred to you, as it did to Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, when his goats brought bears impaled on their horns without any assistance on the part of a shepherd. And the Gemara asks, and let the owner say to him, granted that I was not worthy of a great miracle, but of a small miracle I was worthy. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, this is difficult. We're not sure why the shepherd is treated differently than the farmer. But apparently, that goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, right? The gift of the shepherd was accepted, and the gift of the farmer was not. And we don't know why. Cain didn't know why. But Cain did not react well. He had no training or experience or sports psychologist or any amount of time to improve his midos, his character traits, because sadly it all happened so fast at the beginning of time, and there were no human examples to learn from before. How lucky are we that we have so many examples to learn from, so that perhaps we can make a better choice than Cain did when he let his anger and jealousy overwhelm him and he slew Abel. Okay, new subject. We're on page 106b. It is taught in one baraisa with regard to one who cultivates a field, the first and second time that he plants the field again, if the crops were destroyed by some mishap. The first and second time that there is a mishap, he has to try again. But the third time, he is not required to plant it again, right? If there's something, okay, he had bad luck. Right, what are you going to do? Plant it again. Try to do better. A second time, it went really bad. Now, does he have to try a third time? So the first view is, no, he does not. But the third time, he is not required to plant it again. And it is taught in another baraisa that on the third occasion, he must plant the field again. But on the fourth time, the crops are destroyed, then he is not required to plant it again. So these two baraisas appear to contradict one another. Do we establish that the combination of this farmer and this field is just not going to work out? Either the field is bad or the farmer is bad, or that combination of this field and this farmer, something is bad. do we establish that we should give up and the farmer should go look elsewhere and the owner should look for a different farmer, tenant farmer? Do we establish that after it goes bad 2 times or after it goes bad 3 times? We have heard this question before a bunch of times, though not so much lately. What we're talking about is a chazaka. Chazaka, translated presumptive status. Right? When do we acquire the presumptive status that there is a new legal status established by a thing happening either 2 times or 3 times? That's called a chazaka. So Rebbe, right, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi redacted the Mishnah. He says we establish the chazaka after 2 times that it happened, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says 3 times. And I've read this so many times I could never remember, so today I offer a mnemonic for remembering this. R2, like R2D2, R233, right? So R2, Rebbe, right? Rebbe, 2 syllables, Rebbe, R2. Rebbe does it in 2 instances. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, so ben Gamliel is really 1 word, the son of Gamliel, so he has 3 words in his name, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So the one with 3 names, he requires 3 instances, right? R233. Maybe that'll be helpful for us to remember. So the Gemara raises an objection. What did I say before? Wait a minute, where was I? What just happened? Yeah. This is not difficult. This baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, whereas that baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And the Gemara clarifies, this baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, who says that presumptive status, chazaka, is established by 2 occasions, while that baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that presumptive status, chazaka, is established by 3 occasions, right? R233. Reish Lakish said they taught that a cultivator plants a limited number of times only if he planted the field and it sprouted and then locusts consumed the crops. But if he planted it and the crops did not sprout at all, so then the landowner can say to him, well, just keep planting, right? I mean, if you plant the seeds and they don't sprout, that you're going to know relatively quickly. So keep planting, right? You don't have to wait till the end of the season. If it just didn't even come up out of the ground, plant again. As soon as, the amount of time has passed when you would have expected to see sprouts, plant again. The owner can say to him, continue planting it on all the days that are fit for planting, right? As long as we're still within what could loosely be called the planting season, keep trying. And the Gemara asks, and until when does the period of planting last? And the Gemara answers, Rav Papa said, until such time that the sharecroppers come in from the field and the stars of the Pleiades are stationed over their heads, which occurs roughly during the month of Shvat, right? During Shvat. So the Gemara raises an objection to this from a baraisa that discusses the verse. Right now, we think of the planting season in America as you plant in the spring, you harvest in the fall. But in Israel, which is a desert and the summer is crazy hot and dry, it's not like that, right? They actually plant in the fall and harvest in the spring. So now let's get a little bit closer on that. So the Gemara raised an objection to this baraisa from a baraisa that discusses the verse in the Bible from which the sages learn that the year is not divided into 4 seasons, but rather the year contains 6 seasons. How so? Genesis 8:22. While the earth remains, planting and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Remember where you heard that, right? That is after the flood. God is promising that he will not destroy the entire world again. Bad things might come into the world. Bad things might affect large regions of the earth, but God has promised that he will never destroy all life on earth again, the way that he did with the flood. And then he sets the rainbow as a sign of that promise. And that's Genesis 8:22. But this is the way God says it. While the earth remains, so as long as there is an earth, planting and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night, which obviously are a different category than these others, shall not cease, right? These are the cycles. So the Baraisa interprets this verse as referring to 6 seasons of the year. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says in the name of Rabbi Meir, and similarly Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh would say in accordance with his statement, the second half of Tishrei, all of Mar Cheshvan, and the first half of Kislev, these are the days of planting. Okay, so what's Tishrei? Rosh Hashanah, right? So that's usually September, October. All of Mar Cheshvan, right, which is the next month after that. And then the first half of Kislev, right, which is the month that toward the end of it is Hanukkah. Right, so we're talking about the days of planting are September, October, November, maybe a piece of December. These are the days of planting in the Holy Land. The second half of Kislev, that's where Hanukkah actually falls, all of Tevet, and the first half of Shvat, these are the winter days. So planting, right? Planting is fall, and it runs up against winter. The second half of Shvat and Adar, and the first half of Nisan, so Purim and Passover, this is called the period of cold. So we go from planting to winter to cold. So it's like, when it gets a little deeper, but we're coming out. And then the second half of Nisan, all of Iyar, and the first half of Sivan, that's where we are right now, Sivan. This is the harvest period. And the second half of Sivan, all of Tammuz, and half of Av, these are the summer. While the second half of Av, and all of Elul, and the first half of Tishrei, where Rosh Hashanah actually lands, right? So the end of the summer, these are the seasons of heat, right? So we have planting, winter, cold, harvesting, summer, heat. Those are the 6 seasons according to the Bible as interpreted by the sages. Now the Baraisa adds, Rabbi Yehuda also would divide the year into these 6 seasons, but he counts from the beginning of Tishrei rather than from the middle of Tishrei. And Rabbi Shimon counts from Mar Cheshvan, so that Mar Cheshvan and Kislev constitute the season of planting, and so on. They still have 6, they just demarcate it a little bit differently. And the Gemara states its objection, why I brought this up. So who is the most lenient of all of them in that the period of planting occurs at the latest time of the year? Because we're wondering, well, how long should this tenant farmer who plants and nothing sprouts, how long does he have to keep attempting to plant before you say that, okay, the season of planting is over and it's no point in planting anymore? How late is that? So who is the most lenient of all of them in that the period of planting occurs at the latest time of the year? It is Rabbi Shimon. And even he did not say that the planting season extends that far to the time when the Pleiades is above their heads. So the Gemara responds, that is not difficult, as this is referring to a cultivator who accepted from the owner the planting of early crops, while that case involves a cultivator who accepted from the owner the planting of late crops, which are performed at a much later date. And the Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Yehuda says, if the cultivator received it from the owner for a fixed sum of money, right? So remember, he's paying rent in order to get the field, and then everything he harvests from the field belongs to him. He still has to pay an absolute amount of rent. Now, what is he? Usually they promise to pay an amount of produce that they're going to farm from that land, but they could just as easily promise an amount of money, right? So if the cultivator received it from the owner for a fixed sum of money, so then whether a regional disaster occurred or not, he does not subtract the produce that he owes as part of his tenancy. And the Gemara relates, there was a certain man who received land to plant garlic on it, on the bank of the river Malkasava, in exchange for a specified sum of money. And the bank of the river Malkasava became dammed up. And the case came before Rava. In other words, so the planting was a disaster. So the river Malka, the case came before Rava, who said to the cultivator, well, the river Malka Sava does not usually dam up. Therefore, it is classified as a regional disaster. Go subtract this loss from the payment that you owe to the owner. But the rabbis said to Rava, didn't we learn in the Mishnah here, if the cultivator received it from the owner in exchange for a fixed sum of money, whether this way or whether that way, i.e. whether it was a regional disaster or not, he does not subtract the produce he owes as part of his tenancy. And Rava said to them, there is no one who is concerned for the ruling of Rabbi Yehuda, since it is a minority opinion that is rejected. So that was Rabbi Yehuda, that if it's money, it's treated differently. But Rava says, no, we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. Here's Mishnah 7. In the case of one who receives a field from another to cultivate in return for the payment of 10 core of wheat per year, and its produce was blighted by a crop disease or the like, the cultivator gives the owner the 10 core of wheat from it, but it does not have to provide him with high quality wheat. He agreed to pay the rent in produce, not money, from the field that he's farming, and blight came, and so it was substandard wheat that was produced that year. So it seems like the cultivator gives to the owner 10 core of wheat from that substandard produce. He can do that, right? It's an amount of weight. It's obviously not as good as if it was good wheat, but he's okay to do that. If the wheat stalks produced by the field were particularly good stalks of wheat, the cultivator, by the same token, may not say to the owner, I will buy regular wheat from the market and keep all the much higher than standard quality wheat for myself. Rather, just as he can pay with substandard wheat because it was a blighted year, he has to pay with the best quality wheat because it was a bumper year. And that is the Mishnah. Gemara. The Gemara relates, there was a certain man who received land to grow hay in exchange for paying the owner several core of barley. So he's not paying in money, he's paying with a measure of barley. But he's not growing barley there. He's renting the land in order to grow hay, right? So he owes barley. He said, I'm going to pay you in barley, but he's renting the land for the purpose of growing hay. After the field produced hay, the recipient plowed and he sowed it with barley. And that barley was blighted. So he was going to get a 2-for-1 out of this field. So the workers sought to pay the owner from the damaged barley that he had cultivated, in accordance with our Mishnah, which says if you are going to pay with barley and the barley is blighted, you could still pay with that barley. Rav Chaviva from Surah in the Euphrates sent the following question before Ravina. What is the law with regard to a case of this kind? Is it considered similar to an instance of it was blighted? If it was blighted, he gives him from inside the field, or is it not similar to that? Ravina said to him, is it comparable? There in the Mishnah, the land did not perform its owner's mission. And the cultivator also received blighted produce. So everybody got stuck with blighted produce, and the farmer can use the blighted produce to pay the owner. But in this new case, where it was hired for the purpose of growing hay, and it produced hay, so for what it was hired to do, it delivered, and then the guy who rented it was trying to get that barley from the same land. Okay, but he just said he's going to pay with barley. He didn't say he's going to pay with barley from this land. So since the field delivered what it was supposed to deliver, says Ravina, here the land did perform its owner's mission, as the cultivator took the land for the purpose of growing hay, which it produced. So his additional crop of barley was not part of their agreement, and therefore he cannot pay his debt with blighted barley. He has to go get proper barley, even if he has to buy it in the marketplace. And the Gemara relates, it was a certain man who received an orchard from another to cultivate in exchange for paying the owner 10 barrels of wine. But that wine produced from the orchard's grapes turned sour. Rav Kahana thought to say that this is an example of the ruling of the Mishnah that if it was blighted, he may give from inside the damaged produce. Rav Ashi said, is this comparable? There in the Mishnah, the land did not perform its owner's mission as the crop was blighted, whereas here the land performed the owner's mission, as there was nothing wrong with the grapes themselves. The wine turned sour in the cultivator's possession, but the field was hired to produce the grapes, and it did that. The fact that later it produced sour wine was just something that went wrong for the vintner, right? The guy who hired the vineyard to grow the grapes, and then when he made the wine, something went wrong. So he owes what he agreed to pay. The Gemara comments, and Rav Ashi concedes with regard to grapes that were shrunk over the course of their growth, and with regard to a field whose sheaves were blighted, that since the damage occurred to the crop itself, then the cultivator can pay his debt from the produce of the field, even though it's damaged produce. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7. Now, Mishnah number 8, and I'm actually pretty close to done. Questions or comments, get them in, please. With regard to one who receives a field... With regard to one who receives a field from another in order to plant it with barley, he may not plant it with wheat, as wheat weakens the field more than barley does. It uses up more nutrients from the soil. But if he receives it in order to plant wheat, he may plant it with barley if he wishes, since barley is less taxing to the soil. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel forbids it. If you said wheat, you do wheat. If you say barley, you do barley. You can't change the crop, even if the crop is going to be less taxing to the soil. And similarly, if he receives it to plant with grain, he may not plant it with legumes, as the legumes weaken the field more than grains do. But if he receives it in order to plant legumes, he may plant it with grain. So, according to the majority opinion, if he's less taxing to the soil, he can make that change. But according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he cannot. He can only do what he agreed to do. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara. Rav Chisda said, what is the reason of the ruling of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? The landowner has apparently suffered no loss from the cultivator's actions. So his reasoning is, as it is written, Zephaniah 3:13, the remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. In other words, one may not retract from an obligation accepted upon oneself, even if no one suffers as a result. How easy is it to tell ourselves, oh, there's nobody got harmed. I could tell this little lie. I benefit, and nobody is harmed. So it's okay. Says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, if you do that, first of all, it's wrong, period. And second, you're training yourself that it's okay to lie. And once you give yourself that slack, you'll keep getting more and more slack, and then you'll come to lie in a situation that does hurt others. So you have to have that commitment to the truth, says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. That's what you agreed to. But the majority were a little bit more flexible. Not that you can lie, that you don't have to keep your word, but really, maybe in the regional custom of these places, it was accepted that what you were saying is, I'm gonna plant wheat, right? So barley's the one that's less taxing. Yeah, I'm gonna plant wheat, which means I can plant anything I want, even wheat. But everybody's happy if I only plant barley because it's less taxing to the soil. Maybe that was understood in the region, and so it wasn't considered dishonest in any way. Even there, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would say, let's hold ourselves to an even higher standard. The Gemara raised an objection to this from a Baraisa. The Purim collection, right? We collect charity for the poor on Purim because it's one of the commandments of Purim. So the Purim collection that we take when we collect charity for Purim, it's only so that the Purim can have a Purim feast. That's the purpose of the charity that's collected on Purim. The Purim collection is only for the Purim feast. But one does not scrutinize the matter by limiting the allocation for the poor to the exact costs of the meal and no more. I mean, the poor are the poor. Let's not be so, meticulous about what they can use the charity for. And it is not permitted for a poor person to purchase even a strap for his sandal from it unless he stipulated in the presence of the people of the city that he may do as he wishes with the money he receives. This is the statement of Rabbi Yaakov, who said it in the name of Rabbi Meir. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is lenient, as he maintains that donors are not particular in this regard. And this shows that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is not bothered by a change of mind if no harm results. Seemingly now the views have switched. So Abaye said Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's reason is as explained by the master. Abaye's teacher Rabbah, as the master says, one for whom it is preferable to grow crops and yet have his land remain as fertile as if it lay fallow, should plant wheat one year and barley the next year. In addition, he should plant 1 year lengthwise and the following year crosswise. And in this manner, he will prevent the land from being weakened. And the Gemara comments, and we said that his use of land without following these dictates would weaken it only where he does not plow and repeat his plowing, i.e. plow the field twice before reseeding it. But if he plows and repeats his plowing, we have no problem with it. So consequently, the reasoning of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is that a change of crops at the wrong time can weaken the field. But as to, is he very, very stringent to make people do what they said they're going to do in every case, even where we wouldn't expect them to, or not? We have not proven that definitively. Okay. Few questions from Sharon and Joseph and Eva and Bill. Sharon, my rabbi made a great commentary in last week's Torah portion on the priestly blessing. Right? We learned tracked in Parsha Naso how the Kohanim, the priest, blessed the people. In short, in order to have shalom, total peace, you need to have both blessing, bracha, from the varechecha, and security, yishmerecha. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, right? You need both luck and security, right? Blessing that comes from God, it's out of our control, and security, right, where we do our best to make sure we do our part so that we stay safe, so that we've done our work, so we have our best chances to be secure, right? You pray for the blessing, and you do your part, which is known as hishtadlus. Joseph, question, what if it is a national disaster, even something like a prophetic incident like the future war of Gog and Magog, for instance? Well, seemingly we go with the majority, right? Once it's regional, once it's widespread, then everyone, who's caught up in that is caught up in that, and the landowner cannot be stringent with the farmer so long as the farmer planted. He had to do his part. He had to try. Okay, then he was not able to produce. He loses, the landowner loses, everybody loses, but then the protection of our previous Mishnah does apply. Eve, I love God promises because I have hope when I remember that God promises. In other words, Eve, I think, is saying that, humans, you're as good as your word. It's wonderful to be a person who's regarded as his word is his bond. And we should all strive to be that, and be that, and be that, and be that over and over again. And if we fail and we fall, strive to be that guy the next time. But God, we can count on, right? God doesn't fall short. God keeps his promise. Very good. Bill, fun side note on what constitutes a season. We're talking about the 6 seasons according to the Bible. So in the English language, although we don't often realize it, we're following the old Anglo-Saxon system, and the ancient Angles had 2 seasons, not 4, which is why sumar and winter, so summer and winter, have stayed pretty much the same in the English language. But we have many more names for spring and autumn. Less so spring now, which has been pretty stable for a good century or so. But think about fall, autumn, and harvest from the Old English harfast, which was just the name for September. We say we harvest crops after the month name, not the other way around. That is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that, Bill. Now I feel really good that I put 2 emojis in the title. It was a snowflake and a hot sun. That's what I've got for us today. I hope we've all learned something of value. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.